Chapter 5. You've settled in nicely. Jeremy strolled leisurely through the spacious living room and gazed out the window. And what of you? He was right. The park-like grounds beyond the glass formed a riot of autumn color, one of those scenes you could only truly savor on a crisp Indian summer day. An autumn idyll, he mused, turning to Dylan. You like Indian summer, don't you, Dill? Dylan set aside the magazine he'd been casually leafing through and looked up at his grinning friend. I prefer a maiden spring, he replied in kind. He tossed the magazine aside and poured himself a cup of coffee. But you know more about comfort than anyone. After all, you're our resident specialist in creating it. And you're a specialist in destroying it, Jeremy shot back. As the owner of a network of design studios across America and Europe, including Germany, he knew his friend's knack for chaos all too well. Tell me, how did you manage to drive those typically phlegmatic Germans absolutely berserk? That quiet little Mr. Culm was ready to tear me limb from limb. I had to write him a check or he would have throttled me. You wrote him a check? Dylan exclaimed. Why didn't you tell me? I'll pay you back immediately. Keep it, Jeremy laughed. Buy cigarettes with it, you international vagabond. I feel responsible for your escapades. After all, I'm the one who introduced you to those respectable Culms. He trailed off, clearly itching to unload a barrage of questions. Dylan watched him in silence, betraying nothing of the amusement he felt at his friend's impatience. Finally, Jeremy plunged ahead. Listen, Woodsy. Jeremy had a habit of mangling Dylan's surname in every conceivable way. Woodsy, Woodings. What's with this new hobby of yours, imposing yourself on unsuspecting hosts and turning their homes into demolition zones? You're not some tramp, and you just came into an inheritance. By the way, who decided to bless you with that? Dylan sighed, paced the length of the room, then sank back into his chair. He didn't seem eager to explain himself, but he did. The inheritance is pretty straightforward. Some relative, maybe a cousin, maybe a great-uncle, died. I never figured out exactly how we were related. I didn't even know him. All I know is he left me as his sole heir. And as far as I can tell, the old fellow had a sense of humor. He glanced at Jeremy and added, Turns out he left me a cool $1 million and a villa in Santa Rosa. Nothing extravagant, but perfectly livable. Jeremy ran his hand through his thick blonde hair. Well, he said, money does breed money. Dylan ignored the remark and pressed on. As for my hobby, as you call it, it ties directly to this unexpected windfall. I'm hardly keen to fuss over recently acquired real estate. So I decided to entertain myself. In what way? Jeremy frowned. Dylan gave a sly smile. I have a simple but admirable curiosity. I wanted to see how far the noble virtue of hospitality would stretch. Wait, Jeremy leaned forward, eyes fixed on Dylan. You mean you've been deliberately testing the patience of Austrians, Germans, Swiss? Yes, Dylan said matter-of-factly. And now it's our dear fellow Americans' turn. But why? Explain, what possible reason? As I said, for amusement. And for a little contest. The homeowner who tolerates me for a full month, without insulting me or making any material claim, wins the prize. What prize? Jeremy asked dully. My inheritance. Jeremy nearly leapt from his seat. He thought Dylan was pulling his leg or had gone mad. You mean you'll just hand over $1 million in a California villa? He asked, blinking in disbelief. Do you realize what you've set in motion? Someone will get rich for doing practically nothing. He paced in agitation, arms flailing, head shaking in astonishment. And all the while, Dylan watched him with amused detachment. Finally, Jeremy whirled back. All right. Say I believe you. You don't want to deal with the estate, but $1 million won't break your bank, will it? First, Dylan countered, the $1 million isn't lying idle in my pocket, it's already working for me quite profitably. And second, I currently rent out the villa. It's never empty or left to decay. It actually pays its own upkeep. Jeremy scratched the back of his head. You've always been shrewd. No doubt there. But you're really willing to give it all up that easily? Dylan shrugged haughtily. Nothing of the sort. Winning my prize will be far harder than any lottery jackpot. So far, no one has even made it halfway through the month. It's hardly easy. He glanced at his watch. Waiting for someone? Jeremy asked at once. You know I have that interview today. They're breathing down my neck. It's odd, though. They should have been here 20 minutes ago. I'll go then, Jeremy said, rising and heading for the door. An interview is a private affair. Chapter 6. Helen had no choice but to take her boss's kind but pointed suggestion and drive herself to the airport. As she watched the autumn leaf trees flash past, she replayed her morning encounter with Miss Darrell. Glancing over the list of questions, Helen had been baffled. The standard run-of-the-mill, "What are your creative plans?" She saw nothing earth-shattering in this interview. And yet Viv had gone to great lengths to hype it. That only fueled Helen's curiosity. Despite Viv's chilly hauteur, Helen liked her boss. With a manager like Violet Darrell, one should never expect the freewheeling democracy of other departments. Viv kept a strict distance, nitpicked relentlessly, and always had the last word. And yet Viv was the sort of leader who would fiercely defend her team when it mattered. You could bring her any trouble without fearing a curt, "That's your problem." Time and again, Viv had rescued Helen and her colleagues from tight spots. For that, her exacting standards were more than forgivable. Though her thoughts drifted to Kevin, and a happy smile brightened her face, Helen couldn't deny Viv's judgment. Soon, she told herself. Once Kevin finishes his book, we'll marry. About that book, Helen had asked over breakfast. It's about war, life, and love, Kevin had answered cryptically. Helen knew he'd reported from Palestine and Iraq. She had no doubt it would be a masterpiece, one that might earn him a handsome advance. Money hardly mattered. Helen simply wanted to support him. He'd made it clear he wouldn't live on her dime, though the temporary lack of work weighed on him. Such was the pride of a real man, and Helen's heart ached for him. She parked neatly in front of the hotel, took a deep breath of the cool autumn air, and stepped out. The Hopkins Airport Hilton lay just a quarter-mile away, an oasis of calm amid the bustle of travelers bound for dreamy seaside escapes. Helen realized it must have been years since she'd flown merely for pleasure. The hotel's facade was long and elegant, its rose-brown brick suggesting a vaguely English style, though Helen had no notion of architectural genres. A manicured lawn stretched before the entrance, dotted with ornate gazebos. Beyond lay a forest of trees whispering of brisk walks in sunshine or rain. Perfect. Inside the spacious lobby, rich browns and golds blended on furniture, rugs, and lamps without a hint of flamboyance. This newspaper publishing, toy manufacturing fellow has impeccable taste, Helen thought. She'd arrived early on purpose to absorb the ambience. A friendly clerk greeted her. No need to flash her press pass. Word evidently traveled fast that journalists awaited the newly arrived millionaire. The clerk explained that Mr. Woodward's had stepped out briefly, no keys left behind, but Helen was welcome to wait in the lobby or up on the third floor, where he'd been given a suite. There were comfy chairs, magazines, even coffee. Helen chose the third floor and, eschewing the elevator, climbed the marble staircase with its gleaming dark oak banister. Now, why did I decide to inspect his suite before even meeting him? She wondered as she watched a young maid wheeling a refreshment cart down the wide corridor. "Good afternoon," Helen said briskly to the maid in her beige uniform. "I'm with Business and Leisure Weekly. My interview with Mr. Woodward's is imminent." The maid, flustered, looked from Helen's open badge to her face. Judging by the expression, the maid must be new to this caliber of hotel. Helen pressed on, voice firm. "Mr. Woodward's told me he might be delayed and asked me to wait in his suite." Helen delivered the lie with such confidence that it sounded like truth. The maid, clearly impressed by the official badge, led her to Mr. Woodward's door without a second thought. Once inside the suite, Helen paused to take it all in. She believed that a person's surroundings spoke volumes. But what can a standard hotel room say? Still, this was no cookie-cutter lodging. The living area felt warm and inviting, yet elegantly designed. Plush carpet, tasteful furniture, muted gold drapes, a few refined paintings, all signs of a top-drawer decorator. It hardly felt like a numbered room. A door off the living area revealed a bedroom in soft pastels, furnished with only the essentials: a large king-size bed, a modest walnut wardrobe, and a writing desk by the window, complete with a laptop. Helen's shoulders sagged. What did I expect? Scandalous evidence. She turned to leave when suddenly animated voices and the click of a door startled her. Panic seized her heart. 2 men were entering the living room, laughing carelessly. In horror, Helen darted back into the bedroom and hid behind the heavy drapes. She was mortified, a self-made Mata Hari. She pictured herself being dragged back by the maid, humiliated in front of Viv. A sliver of hope flickered. Perhaps they would leave again. She could slip out after them, unnoticed. But first, the interview. Biting her lower lip until it stung, she resolved to press on. From her hiding place, she heard their conversation. Initially, they spoke of business, names of foreign firms that meant nothing to Helen. The discussion soon turned casual, and then Helen heard something remarkable. Unable to contain herself, she fumbled for her recorder and pressed on. She often used it with permission. Now she was taking an extraordinary risk. I'll delete this as soon as I get home, she told herself. Her fear melted away as every word washed over her. Then dread returned. What if it was all a ruse? Perhaps Woodwards and his partner knew she was in the suite, had staged this just for her. The maid might have warned them. Heat prickled Helen's palms. What if they were watching her through the peephole? She pressed her cheek against the cold wall, clutching the recorder, heart pounding. Soon both men muttered about the press being tardy and prepared to leave. At last, Helen slipped from behind the drapes and crept to the bedroom door. I'll die if they catch me here. Tiptoeing into the living room, she saw no one hiding behind furniture or curtains. They really had gone. Helen opened the door and edged into the corridor, keen to avoid the maid's trolley. Relief flooded her when the hall was empty. What now? She strode to the grand mirror by the staircase and studied her reflection. Flushed cheeks, disheveled hair, smeared lipstick. With swift care she touched up her look, then a clever plan sparked in her mind. Instead of sneaking past the desk, she'd stay right here. She would sit in one of the plush chairs, open a magazine, look like any other waiting guest, and call Mr. Woodwards on his personal line. She'd apologize for being delayed by traffic and ask if he could grant her another interview, perhaps later today or the next day. Viv would applaud her resourcefulness. Helen settled into a carved wood armchair, dialed the number Miss Darrell had given her, and waited. "Hello," came the familiar velvet baritone. Helen drew a calm breath. "Mr. Woodwards," she began. "Yes. Good afternoon. This is Business and Leisure Weekly. I apologize if I'm late." Helen paused for effect, then continued smoothly. "I'm here at your suite door, sir. If you have the time, I'd be honored to interview you. If now is inconvenient, could we perhaps meet tomorrow?" His hearty laugh made her smile inside. He seemed reasonable, without a hint of star behavior. "We must have crossed paths while I was getting cigarettes at the bar," he said. "But if you can spare 20 minutes, come up." "Will that work?" "Perfect," Helen exclaimed. Yes, of course. Thank you so much." She leaned back, exhausted but triumphant, and closed her eyes. Now she had time to process the bombshell she'd recorded. $1 million and a California villa up for grabs, just for hosting a disagreeable houseguest for a month. She imagined Kevin and herself in that Santa Rosa palace, then off on their honeymoon anywhere they pleased. Best of all, Kevin could finish his book without worrying about publishers or editors. It would fly off the shelves, she was sure. Then he would hold the first printed copy aloft, his eyes shining with pride, just as he had her on that morning in her tiny kitchen. Only now it would be their grand new home. This was her chance to give him everything he'd ever dreamed of. Creativity was his whole world. She vowed to become his almost everything. Yet doubt flickered. Would Kevin accept such a gift? He'd fiercely refused to live on her income. "You've already done so much for me," he'd said gently when she'd offered more help. "What have I done?" she'd asked. "You believed in me and supported me." His words had struck her then as both poetic and true. There remained one practical matter. Where? Would they stay while the contest was on? Helen recalled the cottage her parents owned in Bay Village, an hour from Cleveland, a cozy two-story with a guest wing and extra bath, perfect for weekend escapes. It was rarely empty, but she could arrange it for a month. Kevin could keep house, real help, something he'd longed to contribute. At the thought, her spirits soared. All that remained was to steer the eccentric Mr. Woodwards along the right path, and soon $1 million would be in her pocket. After all, from his vantage point, she too was one of his dear fellow countrywomen. A final twinge of conscience niggled at Helen. It was, after all, a con. But she soothed herself. She would be saving people's homes from his boisterous visits, perhaps more than one. And she wasn't taking his last penny. The $1 million had fallen unexpectedly into his lap, and her mission for love was noble. With that thought, her misgivings melted away, and she settled back to await her interview, heart brimming with possibility.